Hi there, Todd Loewen here, and I'd like to talk to you about the public health state of emergency. This is going to be a bit of a longer video for me, but I really want to educate Albertans on my job and how government works, sharing this information with you as best I can. We'll also be discussing the Public Health Act, the recently passed Bill 66, Deena Hinshaw's orders, and vaccine passports and mandates. All very important topics. Before I get into the details, I want to thank all those Albertans who have sent emails to their MLAs calling for the end of the state of emergency. I've received many of these, and I thank you for your engagement with your representatives. To begin to understand how the government is being run right now, we need to start with the Public Health Act. The Public Health Act is an Alberta law that gives the government certain powers, and especially extreme powers, in the event of a public health emergency. These are powers like allowing warrantless entry to private property, or even taking personal property, or issuing various emergency orders like those we've seen from the Chief Medical Officer, Deena Hinshaw. The idea behind the state of emergency is that in the event of a serious public health problem, the government needs to be able to perform certain tasks even if, for example, the legislature could not convene. The Public Health Act gives the government very authoritarian powers and should not be considered lightly. These powers ought to be reserved for the most serious disasters and emergencies because they bypass the power of the legislature. By design, they are not democratic. This law concentrates power in the hands of Cabinet, the executive branch, at their discretion. You may recall that this act was amended by Bill 66 in June of this year. We'll come back to this. I have highlighted a couple sections of the Public Health Act that mention what I've talked about. First is section 29.2.1. You will see this section referenced in the Chief Medical Officer's orders. According to this section, in the event of a public health emergency, the medical officer may, quote, take whatever steps are necessary to lessen the impact of the public health emergency, end quote. Obviously, this is a massive power and one that authorizes very draconian actions. I'd also argue that this power has been abused by a government that prefers to govern by executive order rather than through your elected representatives in the legislature. The second section I put on the screen is section 52.1, which is the section that actually empowers the Lieutenant Governor and Council, otherwise known as Cabinet, to declare a public health emergency. When this emergency is invoked, certain powers become available, like a switch flipping on. So how long does a public health emergency last? According to the Public Health Act, Section 52.8, the emergency order extends 30 days unless it's a pandemic influenza, which extends the order to 90 days. Beyond this, the legislature has to extend the emergency by a resolution of the Assembly, voted on by MLAs like me and whoever represents you. Obviously, we MLAs are not in the Assembly right now. We're done for the winter. And while we were in Edmonton, we never passed a resolution like the one mentioned in the Act. So since this is officially classified as a pandemic influenza in the order, 90 days it is. Here is the actual order in council that most recently put Alberta in a state of emergency. You can find it on the Queen's Printer website. And sure enough, you can see it mentions sections 52.1 and 52.8 and the 90-day expiry. You can also see that it is dated September 15th, 2021. Now, if you're watching this video, I posted it on December 16th. That means that 90 days have passed since this was enacted. In your emails, many of you have asked me not to vote to extend the emergency. As I mentioned, we didn't have that resolution presented to us in the legislature. To the best of my knowledge, this order has lapsed and there is no justification for extending it. Remember that these powers are incredibly expansive and anti-democratic, and we shouldn't be running the province on unprecedented executive orders. Your MLA should be making these decisions wherever possible. Certainly, we have been in the legislature for months upon months during this pandemic. There is no reason to continue to abuse these powers. It's also important to recognize that we never did introduce vaccine passports or the latest round of restrictions legislatively. Neither I nor your local MLA ever had the opportunity to vote on vaccine passports or masks or vaccine mandates. The Premier and Cabinet did all these things by executive authority, made possible by their emergency declaration. So the obvious question many of you might be asking yourself is this: what happens to the emergency order if the emergency is over? Well, that's a good question, and one you should probably ask your MLA. Let's be clear, the emergency is over. The switch has been flipped off. Yet the government is giving everyone the impression that their powers last indefinitely. Now here's where it gets really interesting. I said that Bill 66 amended the Public Health Act back in June. In that bill, there was a controversial section added that retroactively validates all the chief medical officer orders made before that part is proclaimed. That is up on the screen right now. Consider that again. Once that section on the screen is proclaimed, everything done before it is validated. Everything is deemed to have been, quote, validly done and, quote, declared in force once this part is proclaimed. So when was this section proclaimed? Well, what a coincidence. This was proclaimed yesterday, December 15th, the exact day the emergency declaration expired. Here's a timeline of events. As you can see, Cabinet has been sitting on this Bill 66 retroactive clause since June. Why didn't they simply proclaim the bill during the summer? After all, the government insisted they were done with everything then. By waiting until December 15th, they gave themselves an opportunity to wait until they had introduced every measure they wanted, including vaccine passports. One final note. In the most recent CMOH order, which I have here, and which was written December 10th, the final line states the following: this order remains in effect until rescinded by the Chief Medical Officer of Health. There is no mention of the end of the state of emergency. There is no mention that the state of emergency expired on the 15th of December. The order continues until the Chief Medical Officer says it stops. And this order here in my hand might just have been validated by the strategically delayed proclamation of Bill 66. Does the government believe Bill 66 gives them a loophole to use these emergency powers indefinitely? It's a troubling thought. So when will the vaccine passports and mandates go away? Under what authority is the government currently claiming to enforce any of this? I don't know. I'll bet your local MLA doesn't either. This is not a government operating democratically. This is not a government accountable to the people or the law. We have to continue to demand answers. We have to continue to demand that legislatures do their jobs rather than being bypassed by sweeping executive authority. We have to resist the undemocratic impulses of this deeply unaccountable government. I hope this helps, and thank you for listening.